Let's start with the title of the poem, which is always a good place to start. And oftentimes we skip past the title of the poem, go right to the first line of the poem. But in this case, especially, the title gives us a lot of important information. So it's Elegy Written in a Country Churchyard. An elegy is a poem that's written on the occasion of someone's death to remember that person. So we know right away that this is a poem that deals with death, that is about death. We don't know quite yet for whom it's written or about whom it's written, but we know that it's supposed to be some kind of an elegy. And we know also where it's supposedly written. Right now, this is sort of a fictional premise, right? We're not expected to believe that this entire poem was written in one sitting in this country churchyard. A churchyard is the land adjacent to a church that may be used as a graveyard, right, where people might be buried. So it's something like a cemetery, and it's in the country, and that's significant, right? That it's in the country as opposed to the city, where we're in a rural landscape, and that's precisely what we see in the first few stanzas of the poem. So let's take a look at this first stanza. There are a lot of words in the first few lines, especially, that might be unfamiliar to you. So it would be of help to use a dictionary, to use Google for these words. But as you'll see, I think once you start to get a picture of what the poem is presenting to us, everything clicks nicely into place. So we read, "The curfew tolls the knell of parting day. The lowing herd winds slowly o'er the lea." We hear a bell ringing, right? The curfew bell. It's towards the end of the day, and so it's ringing to let everyone know that it's late in the day, and perhaps you need to return home at this particular hour. And you have this herd, these cows, also making their own noises as they wind slowly over the field of grass. The plowman homeward plods his weary way and leaves the world to darkness and to me. And so we have this self-insertion of the speaker here, the supposed poet, the poet who's writing the poem in the country churchyard. And the speaker seems to be all alone within this gloomy landscape at this particular hour. Right? The day is turning to night, the light is becoming darkness, and the speaker is all alone. Now fades the glimmering landscape on the sight, and all the air a solemn stillness holds, save where the beetle wheels his droning flight, and drowsy tinklings lull the distant folds. So everything's quiet, everything's still. There are only a few things that are sort of breaking the stillness, right? You have a beetle that's droning about. You have these drowsy tinklings, perhaps also bells that are lulling these distant fields of sheep. They're far away, and so all that you hear from them are these drowsy tinklings, right? Everything is slow and quiet. These sights and sounds of the country landscape. Save that from yonder ivy-mantled tower, the moping owl does to the moon complain. This is continuing on from the previous stanza, right? Everything is still and silent, save the beetle, save these drowsy tinklings, and save this owl. These are the only things that are breaking the stillness and the silence. The moping owl does to the moon complain of such as wandering near her secret bower molest her ancient solitary reign. Whoever's coming close to this place, this hiding place, this bower, this shady place within some trees, who's intruding upon the owl's stronghold. The owl complains of these intruders. It's the bower is its ancient solitary reign, but that phrase also evokes something a little bit more mythical, right? What else might be the ancient solitary reign of this moping owl? Perhaps death as well, right? Anyone who intrudes upon its realm will cause it to complain. Beneath those rugged elms that yew trees shade, where heaves the turf in many a mouldering heap. We see these trees, right? These elms and these yew trees, and then below them, these mouldering heaps. The turf is heaving because there are these mounds in the ground, right? These grave mounds. Each in his narrow cell forever laid, the rude forefathers of the hamlet sleep. And here is where we get the introduction, perhaps, of the main characters of the poem, right? These rude forefathers are the ones who are sleeping in these cells. They're sleeping within the grave mounds that have been dug for them and in which they're buried. That's where they lie, and that's where they sleep. And once the speaker tells us that it's these people who are buried here, we get the signal that perhaps the rest of the poem, or a large part of the rest of the poem, is going to be dedicated to these individuals, right? These rude forefathers of the hamlet. They're forefathers because they're the ones who came before, right? They're dead and perhaps long dead. And they're the predecessors, the ancestors of the people who live here now, who live here in the hamlet. They're also rude, right? They're described as rude. And I think we're familiar with the contemporary meaning of this term, rude, which suggests impoliteness, right? But that isn't quite what's meant here, right? We get the sense that these forefathers are being described as rude, not in a derogatory way, but almost in a complimentary way, right? They're rude in the sense of rough and unsophisticated. They're not these courtiers that you might find in London, in the city. They're unpolished. They're close to the ground, close to the earth. They're down to earth, as we might say, right? So that's the sense in which they're rude. These forefathers are rude. So the next stanza reads, "The breezy call of incense-breathing morn, the swallow twitt'ring from the straw-built shed, the cock's shrill clarion or the echoing horn, no more shall rouse them from their lowly bed." So these, again, we have a series of sounds, but they're not the sounds of parting day as before, right? These are the sounds of the morning, right? We have the cock who's crowing, we have the swallow twittering. So we're not in the present anymore, right? But rather the speaker's presenting to us these sounds of the morning, which these rude forefathers are never going to hear again, right? No more will these sounds rouse them from their lowly bed. And this is something that the speaker is going to harp upon, right? Their lowly bed. What does he think of the lowliness of the lives of these rude forefathers and of their surroundings? For them no more the blazing hearth shall burn, or busy housewife ply her evening care. No children run to lisp their sire's return, or climb his knees the envied kiss to share. We have these scenes of family life, domestic life, and they're happy scenes, right? A happy family gathering together. The thing is, these rude forefathers, they're never going to experience these pleasures again, right? And again, these are domestic pleasures. These aren't grand, majestic pleasures, but they're these everyday pleasures that the speaker is attributing to these rude forefathers. Oft did the harvest to their sickle yield, their furrow oft the stubborn glebe has broke. How jocund did they drive their team afield, how bowed the woods beneath their sturdy stroke. And here we have a description of the occupation of these rude forefathers, right? They are farmers. They drive their team of oxen afield. They break the ground, the glebe, right, the stubborn ground, and they're harvesting their crops with the sickle. This is what they do. This is how they are daily occupied. So what does the speaker think about this? Think about what these rude forefathers do, the pleasures that they're no longer going to experience, the sounds that are never going to rouse them from their beds, the domestic pleasures that they're never going to experience anymore. And in this next line, in this next stanza, the speaker seems to be making an argument. Right? He says, let not ambition mock their useful toil. And again, the they here, the there, is referring to the rude forefathers. Let not, so this is a second person address, it's an imperative. It's saying, you do not let ambition mock the useful toil, the useful work that these rude forefathers do. Right, in breaking the ground, in harvesting crops. It's lowly work, it's the work of the poor, of peasants, right? But it shouldn't be mocked. And it shouldn't be mocked by those with ambition. The ambitious, they think of the work as too lowly, but the speaker is saying, there's some value to this work, and it really shouldn't be devalued. Right? Let not ambition mock their useful toil, their homely joys and destiny obscure, nor grandeur hear with a disdainful smile the short and simple annals of the poor. So on the one side we have ambition, we have grandeur that looks down with a disdainful smile on the poor, on the simple. And then on the other side we have these rude forefathers, their useful toil, their homely joys. And really they're just doing their own thing, right? But it's the ambitious, it's those who have a sense of their own grandeur who look down on them. But the speaker is saying, don't do that, right? Don't look down on them. Why? The boast of heraldry, the pomp of power, and all that beauty, all that wealth e'er gave, awaits alike the inevitable hour. The paths of glory lead but to the grave. So this is the why, this is the because, right? Don't look down on them because we're all going to die, right? We're all going to end up in the same place. You might have accomplished great things, you might have accumulated a great deal of wealth, but you can't take that to the grave, right? We're all going to end up in the same place. We're all going to die. Nor you, ye proud, impute to these the fault, if memory o'er their tomb no trophies raise, where through the long-drawn aisle and fretted vault the pealing anthem swells the note of praise. We see these images of a grand tomb, a grand memorial, a mausoleum, the kind of memorial that a famous person, an important person, might receive. Well, these rude forefathers don't get any memorial like this, right? But that's not to say that they didn't live valuable lives, right? The speaker is making this argument. Don't impute the fault to these forefathers, right? These rude forefathers. Nor you, ye proud, impute to these the fault. Do not impute the fault. It's not their fault that they aren't remembered as grandly as some other famous people. Right? It's not their fault. Well, whose fault is it? It's the fault of everyone who's doing the remembering, right? Perhaps it's the fault of we who evaluate the lives of those who have come before us. Can storied urn or animated bust back to its mansion call the fleeting breath? Can honor's voice provoke the silent dust, or flattery soothe the dull cold ear of death? This is a continuation of the argument in the previous stanzas. Right? We all end up in the same place. Even if you're celebrated in death or after your death, what difference does it make? Right? Can you even hear how you're celebrated after you die? The dull, cold ear of death is perhaps all that can hear. Perhaps in this neglected spot is laid some heart once pregnant with celestial fire. Now the speaker is taking another turn after telling us that these rude forefathers, they had these simple lives. They are no longer going to enjoy the simple pleasures that they once enjoyed. They have these simple memorials contrasted with the glorious memorials of important people. Now the speaker is telling us to imagine, right? This is an imaginary depiction. Perhaps in this neglected spot, well, it's a spot on the ground in the churchyard, perhaps a mound, right? A moldering heap among the many others. Perhaps in this spot is laid some heart once pregnant with celestial fire, some person who had a fiery spirit, who had passions within them when they lived, hands that the rod of empire might have swayed or waked to ecstasy the living lyre. Perhaps in this mound, in this grave, there lived someone who had the potential to change history, someone who could have swayed the rod of empire, right? Who could have ruled over an empire, who could have been a legendary musician, but wasn't, right? These rude forefathers, they never accomplished anything so great. Why not? But knowledge to their eyes, her ample page, rich with the spoils of time, did ne'er unroll. So these rude forefathers, they never had a chance to learn, right? To acquire knowledge, to learn about history, learn the kinds of things that would have allowed them to sway the rod of empire or to become legendary musicians, right? Chill penury repressed their noble rage and froze the genial current of the soul. Penury, poverty, was what inhibited them from becoming great, from swaying the rod of empire. Right? Penury, poverty, is what freezes those celestial fires that might have stirred within the heart of these rude forefathers. Full many a gem of purest ray serene, the dark unfathomed caves of ocean bear. So we have all these caves within the ocean, some of which have these pure, these perfect gems, and of course these gems go unappreciated because they're just lost within these caves. Full many a flower is born to blush unseen and waste its sweetness on the desert air. So these flowers, there's nothing wrong with them, right? Except that they're in the desert somewhere where nobody's around to appreciate them, right? It's kind of this idea of the diamond in the rough, something that has intrinsic value, but is not seen, is not appreciated for what it is. In this next stanza, we have this trio of names that you might not be familiar with. Are they important to know? Well, they're nice to know, right? But let's go through the stanza and see what information we can glean about them. Some village Hampton that with dauntless breast the little tyrant of his fields withstood, some mute inglorious Milton here may rest, some Cromwell guiltless of his country's blood. Again, we're talking about the country churchyard, we're talking about the rude forefathers that are buried here, and the speaker is asking us to imagine what they might have been like, these rude forefathers, what kind of lives they might have led. Again, they might be these gems lost in the ocean or a flower in the desert. They might have been a village Hampton, somebody who, with dauntless breast, somebody who is fearless in standing up against the tyrant, not the tyrant of the nation, but the tyrant of his fields, right? You can picture a farmer, a peasant, who's standing up to whoever's bullying him, right? Perhaps his landowner or his neighbor who's a bully. So we have this picture of a noble and valiant village Hampton, not a Hampton on the national scene, but a village Hampton, the Hampton of his village, right? Some mute and glorious Milton, mute and inglorious because again, they were never trained, they were never given the chance to acquire knowledge that you would need to become a Milton, to write the grand epic of the English language, but they were some version of Milton, perhaps, right? A mute, inglorious Milton, a Cromwell, guiltless of his country's blood, someone who had the same greatness of person, but who isn't guilty of all the bloodshed that Cromwell is guilty of, perhaps, right? The applause of listening senates to command, the threats of pain and ruin to despise, to scatter plenty o'er a smiling land, and read their history in a nation's eyes, their lot forbade. And you'll notice that I read across the two stanzas there, and the reason I did that is that the sentence flows across these two stanzas, and the last part of that sentence, which is the first part of the first line of the next stanza, is important in understanding the entirety of the sentence. So their lot forbade. It's the lot of the rude forefathers, right? The circumstances of their birth, where they were born, to whom they were born. All of this forbids them from doing these things, from commanding the applause of senates, to despise threats of pain and ruin, right? Of course, if you're poor, then pain and ruin are really bad things. You can't ignore them. You can't despise the threat of them. If you're hurt, if you're injured, if drought or famine comes upon your land, it hurts. It's ruinous, right? And neither do you have the resources to scatter plenty over a smiling land, to be charitable in the same way that someone with more resources would be able to. You're not a history maker either. So all of this is forbidden by the lot of these rude forefathers. But that's not all that their lot forbids them from doing. Right? We read on, nor circumscribed alone their growing virtues, but their crimes confined, forbade to wade through slaughter to a throne and shut the gates of mercy on mankind. So yes, their virtues were confined in the sense that They can't be as charitable, they can't be as powerful, but they also can't be as criminal, right? They can't commit these great crimes, they can't slaughter their way to a throne, they can't shut the gates of mercy on all mankind. The struggling pangs of conscious truth to hide, to quench the blushes of ingenuous shame, or heap the shrine of luxury and pride with incense kindled at the muse's flame. So these crimes, these lies, they're also incapable of, right? They're incapable of these vices of luxury and pride as well. Far from the madding crowd's ignoble strife, their sober wishes never learned to stray along the cool sequestered veil of life. They kept the noiseless tenor of their way. So these rude forefathers are contrasted with the striving, the madding crowd. They're striving for fame, for riches, for power. But these rude forefathers, they're just doing their own thing. They're just plowing the land. They're doing their daily work. They have these sober wishes and these sober pleasures, right? The domestic pleasures that we had a picture of earlier on in the poem. So they aren't like the madding crowd, right? They just keep on their own way, the noiseless tenor of their way. And now we have another turn in the poem, and the signal for that is this conjunction, yet. Yet even these bones from insult to protect, some frail memorial still erected nigh, with uncouth rhymes and shapeless sculpture decked, implores the passing tribute of a sigh. So even these rude forefathers without fame, without having done anything great, even they have a memorial of some kind, right? They too need to be remembered in their own way. And it's not a huge mausoleum, it's nothing grand like that. It's a frail memorial. It has uncouth rhymes. It's not like they're going to have a Milton or some great poet come write the lines on their tombstones. It's whoever's around, perhaps, right? It's someone who can only write these uncouth rhymes. Not a great sculptor, but someone who's able to make do with what they have. Their name, their years, spelt by the unlettered muse, the place of fame and elegy supply. So they have no fame, and they have no elegy in the sense of a sophisticated poem that's written on the occasion of their death, but they have something else with which to remember them, right? Something else takes the place of fame and elegy. It's whatever's spelt by the unlettered muse. Now, what is this unlettered muse? And many a holy text around she strews. This unlettered muse is spelling the name, the years of these rude forefathers and strewing around these holy texts that teach the rustic moralist to die. So it's nature that teaches the rustic moralist how to die, right? How to die well, and that strews about these holy texts and that spells the name and the years of these rude forefathers. For who to dumb forgetfulness a prey, this pleasing anxious being ere resigned, left the warm precincts of the cheerful day, nor cast one longing, lingering look behind. And this stanza is a rhetorical question. It's asking, who ever leaves the world without at least casting one longing, lingering look behind? Even these rustic moralists who've been taught by nature how to die well, even they are going to cast one lingering look, right? Even those who are fully resigned, right? A pleasing, anxious being who's resigned to death, even that being will look back with at least one longing, lingering look and want to be remembered, right? Will want to be more than just a prey to dumb forgetfulness. On some fond breast the parting soul relies, some pious drops the closing eye requires. We all want to be remembered by at least one person, right? A fond breast. We want someone to drop some pious tears for us. Even from the tomb, the voice of nature cries, even in our ashes live their wonted fires. The soul, the spirit, lives on in death, right? And cries out to be remembered. For thee, and here again is something new in the poem. It's an address to a thee. And this is different from the address to the you previously in the poem, the proud you, the you who is told not to impute fault to these rude forefathers, the disdainful you. This thee is mindful of the unhonored dead. Thee who mindful of the unhonored dead dost in these lines their artless tale relate. This thee is so mindful of these dead that he's relating their tale in these very lines, the lines that we're reading. Right? Well, who is it that is relating the tale of these rude forefathers in these lines in this poem? It's the poet himself, right? The poet who's writing this elegy in the country churchyard. And so it's the speaker of the poem who's addressing himself with this familiar thee, this familiar second person address. Thee, you are the one who's relating this artless tale. You are the one who's mindful of the unhonored dead. If chance, by lonely contemplation led, some kindred spirit shall inquire thy fate. And now we have the speaker imagining what would happen if someone were to inquire about you, right? What would they say about you after your death? So the speaker's wondering about his own legacy. How do I hope to be remembered? Haply some hoary-headed swain may say, oft have we seen him at the peep of dawn, brushing with hasty steps the dews away, to meet the sun upon the upland lawn. So some hoary-headed swain, a country youth, might say he used to come here often. In the morning, he would go out to meet the sun. There at the foot of yonder nodding beech that wreathes its old fantastic roots so high, his listless length at noontide would he stretch and pore upon the brook that babbles by. So he would go lie down under a tree, just spread out. He would go to the stream and stare at it for a long time. He's a lover of nature, apparently. Hard by yon wood, now smiling as in scorn, muttering his wayward fancies he would rove, now drooping, woeful wan, like one forlorn, or crazed with care, or crossed in hopeless love. Not only is he a lover of nature, but he's a romantic. He's emotional, he's passionate, he's prone to all sorts of different emotions, kind of all over the place. One morn I missed him. Remember that this is still the hoary-headed swain that's talking, that's reporting what he knows, what he's observed about the speaker who is, in our imagination, dead, who has passed away. Right? One morning I missed him on the customed hill, along the heath and near his favorite tree. Another came, nor yet beside the rill, nor up the lawn, nor at the wood was he. So one day, the hoary-headed swain doesn't see the speaker, the poet. And the next day, he also doesn't see him. Right? So he's wondering, where did this guy go? The next with dirges due in sad array, slow through the churchway path we saw him borne. So turns out he died, right? That's why he didn't come to the tree, he didn't come to the brook. It's because he died. Approach and read, for thou canst read the lay. So the swain is telling us, come and read the poem here, graved on the stone beneath yon aged thorn. We're supposed to come and read the epitaph that is written on the occasion of the speaker's death. But remember that this is all imaginary, right? That the speaker is imagining what would happen if you were to ask someone about him after he died. And this is what he would wish. This is what he would hope would be on his gravestone. The epitaph. Here rests his head upon the lap of earth, a youth, to fortune and to fame unknown. So the speaker, the poet, did not acquire fame, did not acquire fortune. Fair science frowned not on his humble birth, and melancholy marked him for her own. He was educated, he was lettered, despite his humble birth, but he was quite sad in life. He had a lot of melancholy. Large was his bounty, and his soul sincere. Heaven did recompense as largely send. So he was sincere in everything that he did. He was sincere in his love of nature. He was sincere in all of the passion and the emotion that we saw depicted in the previous stanzas. And that's why, perhaps, heaven sent him a recompense, a reward. He, the speaker, gave to misery all he had, a melancholy tear. He gained from heaven, 'twas all he wished, a friend. That was his recompense, that was his reward for all his melancholy. He gained all that he wished. He gained a friend. No farther seek his merits to disclose, or draw his frailties from their dread abode. There they alike in trembling hope repose, the bosom of his Father and his God. So the epitaph tells us, don't seek to learn any more, don't seek to inquire any further about the person who's buried here. Everything that you need to know has been told to you. You don't need to know anything about his accomplishments in life, what he's published, who he's friends with, what else he's done. Everything that you need to know, all his merits and his frailties, they're all encompassed within these few stanzas that make up the epitaph. So he's with his God along with all his merits and his frailties, and that's all that we need to know.